Good morning. Good morning and welcome. I don't think many of us often think of ourselves as being a part of history, but this morning we share what I believe will become a defining moment for community colleges. We celebrate 75 years of commitment to learning and equitable access for millions of students. We look forward to the coming of a new century of service, but in a larger sense, the excitement and anticipation we feel as we await this extraordinary address by President Clinton and by Secretaries Reich and Riley are a metaphor for our current place in history. Today, there is a new dynamism among our colleges and, despite serious challenges and concerns, a new and energizing sense of purpose. Community colleges have always been known as both the products of and the agents for change. But I believe our opportunities for effecting a real and positive change have never been greater. Community colleges are on the threshold of what we consider our own manifest destiny. I know that we will respond to this moment in time and to the future challenges it portends with excellence, with dedication, and above all, with pride. AACC colleagues, during the few days we spend here in Minneapolis, you will hear from many speakers who are valued champions for community colleges, but very high on the list of allies, we must place the name of the gentleman it is now my pleasure to introduce. Certainly, Dr. Rice should feel at home in a room full of educators. He is a graduate and former trustee of Dartmouth College, a former Harvard faculty member, and he received his law degree from Yale University. As U.S. Secretary of Labor, he has demonstrated extraordinary insight into the global trends affecting all of us, not only as educators, but as working Americans. But closest to our hearts is the understanding he has displayed of the role that community colleges play in the education of our country's workforce and our importance in the educational spectrum. The Secretary has often described community colleges as the unsung heroes of American higher education. On behalf of all of our community colleges, I thank him for giving voice to our cause. Please welcome the Honorable Robert Reich.
Ah, there you are. First, let me say that our hearts go out to the families and the friends of the women and the men and the children who were killed last Wednesday in Oklahoma, and our prayers are with those who were injured. Every American feels deeply that this tragedy both has brought us together but must and will never be repeated. I want to thank Dr. Belcher. Thank you for your warm introduction, and congratulations on your appointment as president of DeKalb College. I want to thank also Dr. David Pierce for his fine leadership of the AACC and also for the partnership that he has established between all of you, the AACC, and the Department of Labor. It's been great to work with you, David, and I appreciate it. I will be short. We're here to celebrate America's community colleges and to congratulate you on your 75th birthday. In an economy that is based ever more on human capital, now I use that term, I know that that's a very cold-blooded term, human capital, But we know what we mean by that. We're talking about the skills and the insights and the capacities of Americans to work together. And in an economy based upon human capital, community colleges are the investment banks. You are not just the unsung heroes, you are absolutely critical. For millions and millions of young Americans, you offer a pathway from school to good jobs. For millions of adults, you offer ways of getting new jobs, ways of upgrading skills. Human capital is America's most precious asset. Other assets, like money and technology and equipment, move around the globe at breakneck speed. Our future standard of living depends uniquely on our people, on our skills, on our human capital. You know, equipment does go around the world so easily. Just about 2 months before I became Labor Secretary, I had to have my hips replaced. It is an arthritic condition. It is related to my height. And about 3 months ago, I was thinking about the movement of capital around the country, around the world, and equipment, and I made some inquiries because I was curious about where my hips were made. And I discovered that my new hips, speaking of capital equipment, were made in, they were designed in France and they were made in Germany, which means I do not even meet the domestic content requirements for being a cabinet secretary. I hope you keep that from my boss. Whatever you do, don't let him know about that. Human capital is also important because in the new economy, skills simply matter more. Now, all of you know this, but it is vitally important we spread the word on this. The core of the economy has shifted over the last 20 years from the factory to the computer, from production of large quantities of identical objects to the creation and the processing and distribution of information. You've got to have skills in order to make it in this new economy. And finally, the third reason why human capital, skills, insights are so important is that all of us owns some human capital. We all have our brains with often unfathomed capacities. We all benefit from investments in lifelong learning. Now, by contrast, the nation's financial capital is owned by only a small fraction of Americans. I don't know how many of you saw the recent study that came out, but according to that study, the wealthiest fifth of Americans, the wealthiest 20%, own 94% of all of the nation's stocks and bonds and other financial assets. But human capital, our brains, our capacity, our skills, we all own. And investments in people pay off for everybody. Now, there's a great debate going on in Washington these days, which will only intensify in coming weeks as the new leadership in Congress presents budget resolutions. There are some politicians who want to give big tax breaks to the owners of financial capital. But this will not help most of us. We tried trickle-down economics in the 1980s, and we saw what happened. A widening income gap between the haves and the have-nots, and a huge national debt. Many of these same politicians want to pay for these tax breaks, believe it or not, by cutting back on college loans, on job training, on school-to-work apprenticeships, and other investments in human capital. This makes no sense whatsoever. The President's goal has been to build and strengthen the nation's human capital. You have been helping us in this effort over the past 2 years. This is why the President came to Washington. This is why we are all here, because we believe so clearly and firmly in the value of investments in people. And the President will talk in more detail later on, but the direct college loan program is critical. School-to-work apprenticeships have helped already tens of thousands of young people moving from school to work, transforming the unemployment insurance system into a re-employment system through one-stop career centers. And many of you have already become one-stop career centers in your communities. And new proposals to turn job training programs into grants that can be cashed in at accredited institutions so people can get the needed skills when they need them, on the terms they need them. And instead of big tax breaks for financial capital, tax breaks for a family's investments in education and lifelong learning. That is an investment that is worth making. I am proud of our economic accomplishments so far. 6,300,000 new jobs. Unemployment down to 5.5%. They didn't say it could be done. They said the natural rate of unemployment, many people, was 6%. No, down to 5.5% with no inflation in sight. The best economic performance this nation has had in terms of new jobs and low inflation in a quarter century. But the larger challenge is still with us. Most Americans still are not benefiting very much from economic growth. We're surging toward inequality at a stunning pace. 1994 was a banner year for corporate America. Productivity went up, profits went way up. The Dow recently pushed through 4,000. The pay of top executives of major companies jumped 10%, and that is not including all of the sky-high stock options. And yet, median wages continue to stagnate or fall. The responsibility falls on all of us, individuals and families, obviously, in terms of taking the opportunities that are there to get skills, to get education, to invest more and more wisely in our human capital. But their responsibility goes beyond families and individuals. It is also a responsibility of all of us in society, of community colleges, of cities, of states, of businesses. And that's why community colleges are so vital, because you are the links that put it all together in your communities. You bring communities together to invest in people. You link businesses and schools and students and workers who are trying to get more skills, trying to make it. Your work is more important and more vital today than it has been at any time in the 75 years of this organization's life. And I want to thank you for helping millions of Americans achieve the American dream. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, my friend, my co-conspirator, a man who has made education not only the centerpiece of this administration, but has put education so firmly and squarely and centrally on the public agenda that people all over America are understanding the value of these kinds of investments. A man who distinguished himself as governor of South Carolina by his concerns for education and has continued unflaggingly to push for more and better education in our primary and secondary schools and beyond. My friend, Secretary of Education, Dick Riley.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bob, and I'll be even shorter. It's a real pleasure to be here, but I join with Bob Reich and all Americans in saying how greatly troubled we all are about the occurrences in Oklahoma City. Our democracy, you know, is great because it's free. And this cruel tragedy violates this concept of individual freedom in the worst possible way. But to be truly free in today's world, we must not only be free from harm and respect others' freedom, but we must also be educated, able to negotiate in a complex economy. And education can and must be seen in our great democracy as the compelling antidote to the turbulence and anger that can drive people to the extreme in times of great social and economic change. And this is one of the many reasons that President Clinton has and is making education the most important part of what this country must look to in the future. If ever there was a time to have a great era of American education, it's now. If ever there was a time to expand opportunity through education, it is now. And if ever there was a time to recognize the strength and the commitment and the foresight of President Clinton in making education a national priority, it is right now. For as Bob Rice said, a great debate is shaping up in Washington about the future of American education. Some people even want to eliminate my job. We were listening to the television the other morning. My wife was reading an article in the paper about abolishing the education department and whatever, and I told her that I was reminded of that country music song, I don't know whether to kill myself or go bowling. Then I began to remind myself that these are the same people who want you to believe that you can balance the budget, cut the deficit, and cut taxes all at the same time. You know, prudence is not always a virtue that is rewarded in politics. But we say that we must, yes, lower the deficit, that must be done, and use a tax cut to invest in education and let the power of an educated and productive people move us towards a balanced budget. You cannot cut the deficit in the future by cutting education today. And as our president has said, if you want to cut the national deficit, start by eliminating the human deficit. I'll tell you, if you smarten up the American people more and more, they'll find a way to keep this country moving forward. And these are the same people also, I want to remind you, that oppose our efforts to increase Pell Grants and to expand school to work. Where we want to invest in education, they want to cut it. Where we want to make student loans easy and efficient, they talk about capping direct lending. And where we want to ensure access and opportunity, they want to send your students a new in-school interest subsidy bill. President Clinton has been and remains a true friend and ally of American education. I know this president. I know this president, and I'll tell you, he is a believer in education, he is an advocate for education, and he is strong for education. And I'll tell you this, he's strong for the community colleges of this great country. President Clinton is on your side and the side of your students. He's committed to giving all Americans, whoever they are, wherever they live, whatever their political philosophy, that wonderful opportunity to get an education of high quality. The opportunity to walk into one of your classrooms, to learn new skills and new knowledge, so that they can walk out with the kind of knowledge that they need that allows them to be self-reliant, free, responsible, patriotic Americans. Good Americans who can raise a family, give their children hope, and make a contribution to their community. That's the American way to move forward, and that must be our future. It's an honor for me, ladies and gentlemen, to present your friend, the President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Secretary Riley, thank you for your introduction. If I were you, I would go bowling. We're going to save your job. Thank you, Secretary Rice, for your enthusiasm, for being enthusiastic about the right things. In your heart alone, you have enough domestic content to be the Secretary of Labor. Thank you, Jacqueline Belcher and David Pierce. I also want to say how very glad I am to be joined here by the distinguished United States Senator from Minnesota, Senator Paul Wellstone, and his wife Sheila, who's here. And two of our colleagues in the House of Representatives, Congressman Bruce Vento and Congressman Bill Luther, also back there. Thank you for being here. I want to say a special word of congratulations to the 20 students who were named to the 1995 All-USA Academic Team. I want to thank those who are watching us via satellite, and I also want to say a special word about some fine students and advocates I met just before I came in here. I met two students who have benefited from our direct loan program. I'll talk more about them in a moment. Two students who are critically interested in public assistance to education, because without that they would not have been able to go to school. And I met a gentleman who's devoting his time to organizing people against the attempt in Washington to start charging interest on student loans while students are still in college. Sandra Tinsley, Jessica Avilas, Jeffrey Lanes, Robbie Dalton Kirkley, who's also one of the academic team All-Americans, and Dave Dahlgren. I thank all of them for meeting with me, and they're here somewhere. If they are, they ought to wave or stand up. There's Jeffrey. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I begin today to talk about education and training, I'd like to say just a word or two, if I might, before this audience of educators and people who believe in and appreciate the value of free speech, about where we are in the aftermath of the Oklahoma bombing and what we are going to do about the kind of America our children will inherit. Yesterday, Hillary and I joined tens of thousands of people in Oklahoma City, and of course, millions of you all across the country, to witness the end result of abject hatred. I was there as president to represent all of you in the morning, but also I felt that we were there, Hillary and I, as ordinary American citizens as well, as husband and wife, as parents, as neighbors of those people. No words can do justice to how moving it was to be there yesterday. No words can do justice to the courage of those who worked in the rescue operation around the clock. And one person has already given her life in that endeavor. No words can do justice to the small act of kindness and generosity, all the people in Oklahoma who won't take money at the gas station or the local coffee shop or the barber shop or even at the airline ticket terminal for people who are there working to try to help them put their lives together. But I will never forget more than anything else the faces
and the stories of the family members of the victims. I was walking through the room shaking hands with them, and I saw a lady with her children who'd been in the Oval Office just a few weeks ago as her husband left my Secret Service detail to go to what seemed to be a less hectic pace of duty in Oklahoma City. I saw the children of a man who was a football hero at the University of Arkansas when so many people who are now on the White House staff were friends of his. A young Air Force sergeant took out 2 pictures his wife had taken of me just 3 weeks ago when I visited our troops in Haiti. And she was one of those troops. But she came home because we wound down our mission there. And she married her fiancé. And 3 days later, she went to the federal building to change her name. And so he had to give me the pictures his wife took. I saw 3 children, teenage children, with a woman and another child taking care of them. One of them had one of my inaugural buttons on. Their mother died last year of an illness. Their father went to our inaugural, and they asked me to sign the pen to their father, who is still missing. 3 teenagers losing both parents. I could go on and on and on. I say to all of you, first we must compete the rescue effort and the recovery effort. Of course, we must help that community rebuild. We must arrest, convict, and punish the people who committed this terrible, terrible deed. But our responsibility does not end there. In this country, we cherish and guard the right of free speech. We know we love it when we put up with people saying things we absolutely deplore. And we must always be willing to defend their right to say things we deplore to the ultimate degree. But we hear so many loud and angry voices in America today whose sole goal seems to be to try to keep some people as paranoid as possible and the rest of us all torn up and upset with each other. They spread hate. They leave the impression that, by their very words, that violence is acceptable. You ought to see, I'm sure you are now seeing the reports of some things that are regularly said over the airwaves in America today. Well, people like that who want to share our freedoms must know that their bitter words can have consequences, and that freedom has endured in this country for more than 2 centuries because it was coupled with an enormous sense of responsibility on the part of the American people. If we are to have freedom to speak, freedom to assemble, and yes, the freedom to bear arms, we must have responsibility as well. And to those of us who do not agree with the purveyors of hatred and division, with the promoters of paranoia, I remind you that we have freedom of speech too, and we have responsibilities too. And some of us have not discharged our responsibilities. It is time we all stood up and spoke against that kind of reckless speech and behavior. If they insist on being irresponsible with our common liberties, then we must be all the more responsible with our liberties. When they talk of hatred, we must stand against them. When they talk of violence, we must stand against them. When they say things that are irresponsible, that may have egregious consequences, we must call them on it. The exercise of their freedom of speech makes our silence all the more unforgivable. So exercise yours, my fellow Americans. Our country, our future, our way of life is at stake. I never want to look into the faces of another set of family members like I saw yesterday. and you can help to stop it. Our democracy has endured a lot over these last 200 years. And we are strong enough today to sort out and work through all these angry voices. But we owe it to our children to do our part. Billy Graham got a standing ovation yesterday when he said, "The spirit of our nation will not be defeated." I can tell by your response that that is true. But you must begin today. The little girl who read the poem yesterday at our service said, "Remember the trust of the children. Darkness will not have its day." The trust of the children is what we are here to talk about. This whole community college movement has made as big a contribution to the future of America as any institutional change in the United States in decades. All of you live every day with the future. You have important work to do. I ask you only to think of how different what you do is from what you have been hearing from the voices of division. Why do community colleges work? Well, first of all, they're not encumbered by old-fashioned bureaucracies. By and large, they're highly entrepreneurial. They're highly flexible. They're really democratic, small d. They're open to everybody, right? In the best sense. They're open to everybody. And people work together. And when something doesn't work, they go do something else. That's what you do. You do it in a spirit of cooperation. You are remarkably unpolitical in that sense. In other words, every experience you have, and you see people of all ages coming through your doors, walking out your doors, going on to better, more fulfilling, more satisfying lives, able to help themselves and strengthen America in the process. It is the direct antithesis of the kind of paranoia and division and hatred that we hear spewed out at us all over this country day in and day out by people exercising their free speech to make the rest of us miserable. And it contradicts the experience of what works in America. So today, that is why I have asked you to do this. I also want to talk to you a little bit about what I hope we can do in education. You want Americans to be more hopeful? You want this to be a more positive place? You want people to be rewarded for their labors? Strengthen education in America. Build the community colleges. Open the doors to all. That's the way to build the future of this country, not by dividing us and bringing us down, but by uniting us, building us up, and pointing us toward the future. No. I have seen the faces of America's future. I met a 46-year-old former welfare mother at San Bernardino Community College, full of enthusiasm and hope for the future. I met a 73-year-old Holocaust survivor in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, who built a successful business and is now committed to investing in the education and training of his employees, using his local educational institution. I met a 52-year-old woman at Galesburg Community College in Illinois, laid off from a factory job after 20 years, but building a better future. Today, I met some impressive people. I met this fine young man down here, Jeffrey Lanes, who had an injury, but didn't let it defeat him. Instead, he went back to school with the help of public assistance to make a new and better life for himself, but we are better off that he is going to have a better life. He's giving us a better America, and we thank him for it, and we ought to support opportunities for other people just like him. I I mentioned her before, but when I met Robbie Dalton Kirtley, who's part of the All-USA academic team, she's one of these non-traditional students. She waited until her youngest child was in kindergarten, and she went back to school. She's from Flat Rock, North Carolina. But she is building a future that will strengthen not only Flat Rock, North Carolina, and her family, but all the rest of us as well. So I thank you for what you're doing, and I ask you how we can do more of it. And what should we be doing in government? Well, when I ran for president, I ran with a heavy bias toward education. I look out in this crowd today and I see a lot of people from our community colleges in Arkansas. I'm proud of the fact that when I was governor, we built more of them. We helped to strengthen the ones that were there. We helped some of the vocational schools to either convert or merge or become more alike by diversifying their curriculums to community colleges. In fact, I was looking at a couple of people out there. I was at their places so often they probably wanted me to leave so they could get some work done when I was a governor. I ran for president in large measure because I felt that the work of America that was being done out in the grassroots, the work of creating opportunity and demanding responsibility and rewarding it, was not being done in Washington. That we were increasing our government's debt at a rapid rate and unbelievably reducing our investment in our future. I believed then, and I believe more strongly now, that this country has two deficits. We've got a budget deficit, but we've got an education deficit as well, and we have to cure them both. We are still living with a legacy of the explosive debts of the last 12 years. The budget cuts we have made already and the taxes we have asked the top 1.5% of our people to pay, listen to this, would balance the budget today. Today we would have a balanced budget except for the interest we owe on the debt run-up between 1981 and the end of 1992. So we are bringing the deficit down. We are committed to that. But we have to remember we have more than one deficit. You heard the Secretary of Labor talking about this, but I have been obsessed since the late 1980s with the increasing inequality in America. You know, when I was born at the end of World War II, I grew up in the American dream. And the great domestic crisis we had was the civil rights crisis. And we thought if we could just get over racial prejudice, that our economy was so strong, our society was so powerful, that the American dream could be just opened up for everyone. And from the end of the Second World War until the late 70s, that's pretty much what happened. All income groups increased together. And in fact, the poorest 20% of our people did slightly better than the rest of us in terms of where they started. We were growing together and going forward. Today we are going forward. Our economy has produced over 6 million new jobs. You heard what Secretary of Labor said. We had the lowest combined rate of unemployment and inflation in 25 years, but we are not growing together. And that is why so many Americans say they do not feel more secure, even though we're having an economic recovery. They say, yeah, I read that in the papers, but it's not affecting my life. I haven't gotten a raise. 60% of our people are living on the same or lower wages than they were making 10 years ago, working a longer work week. Why? Because of the combined impact of the global economy, the technology revolution, the lack of a government response to it. In fact, the government response made it worse. The minimum wage next year, if we don't raise it this year, the minimum wage next year will be at its lowest level in 40 years. That is not my idea of how to get to the 21st century. So we have these, thank you. So we basically are splitting apart economically. If you look at it, it is clear that the fault line is education. Earnings for high school dropouts have dropped at a breathtaking rate in the last 15 years. Earnings for high school graduates have dropped at a less dramatic rate. The only group for which earnings have increased steadily are earnings for people who have at least 2 years of post-high school education and training. You are at the fault line in America. The fault line of American society is education. Those who have it are doing well, those who don't are paying. And the future offers more of the same at a faster rate. Therefore, it is clear that our common mission, if we want to help people help themselves and strengthen this country, must be focused on a relentless determination to see that every American lives up to the fullest of his or her capacities. It is in our common interest. So all these wonderful stories you can tell about your community colleges, all these touching individual triumphs, are also the story of America's rebirth at the dawn of the 21st century. Make no mistake about it, you are doing more than helping individual Americans live out their dreams. You are creating the system in which we can keep the American dream alive for our country and the American idea alive for all the world in the 21st century. If you succeed, we will. You must succeed, and the rest of us must make sure we do what we can to help you do it. Now, I want to make some brief points today about what we are trying to achieve in this Congress and what we are trying to stop from being achieved in this Congress, and I want to ask for your help. In the last 2 years, we had broad bipartisan support for the most substantial increased effort by the national government to support education in a generation. Big increases in Head Start, world-class standards for our schools, and more flexibility for our teachers, our parents, our administrators, and our students to meet them. School-to-work programs so our young people who don't go on to four-year colleges would have the opportunity to move into the workplace with the kind of training and skills that would give them jobs that would raise their incomes, not drive them down. Tech prep programs is a part of school-to-work. A lot of you are involved in the tech prep issue, and it's something I know a lot about from my personal experience, enabling high school students to get work experience and to go straight to community colleges. We created AmeriCorps, our national service initiative, and more than 30 community colleges and this association are participating in AmeriCorps. We've got people doing everything from helping the elderly in Kentucky to tutoring kids in inner-city Chicago to helping with community policing in Rochester, New York, thanks to the community colleges. And I thank you very much for your endeavors. Now, what should we do? Number one, do no harm. Don't undo what we just did. Number one, do no harm. Number two, yes, we need to reduce the deficit, but we should increase the Pell Grant program as we have proposed, not reduce it as some have proposed. Yes, we should cut the deficit, but one way to cut the deficit that is absolutely wrong is to start charging interest on student loans while the students are still in school. There is an answer, you know, in education to the budget conundrum. Almost unbelievably, there is an answer. It is our direct student loan program. We want to make it available for anyone who wants to finance assistance to college. The student loan program, the direct loan program, started when I became president because I wanted to find a way to cut the cost of college loans, to cut the unbelievable bureaucratic paperwork headache, and to give students more options about how to repay loans, because I began to see students in our state who were dropping out of college because they were terrified that they would never be able to repay their loans, especially students who were going to do things that were important to our society but didn't pay a lot. Students who wanted to be teachers, students who wanted to be nurses, students who wanted to be police officers, students who wanted to serve the public and knew that they would have big loans and modest salaries to repay them with. So we began to look around for ways to do this. And we settled on, and the Congress adopted, the direct college loan program. When I took office, everybody in the country was complaining about the way the student loan program worked. Students complained that they couldn't get loans, or if they did, it took them too long, and it was an absolute nightmare to fool with the paperwork. Colleges complained that the paperwork was driving them crazy. And everybody was worried about the nature of the repayment terms and the fact that there weren't enough options. There was also, I might add, an unconscionable amount of loan default, people who would not pay their loans back, costing the taxpayers $2.8 billion a year. And the banks didn't have much incentive to help because they had a 90% guarantee. So by the time, if they brought some sort of action, they'd spend the 10% trying to collect the rest. So why not just take a check from the government? Well, the direct loan program addresses all those problems. It lowers costs for students. It allows borrowers to choose flexible repayment arrangements, including a pay-as-you-earn option. Therefore, it doesn't doom anyone to a crushing debt burden. It's also, believe it or not, helping us to save billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. That, plus Secretary Riley's more vigilant enforcement of the loan program, have cut your losses as taxpayers from $2.8 billion a year to $1 billion a year, a reduction of almost 2/3. But get this. What are we going to do now? In the first year, we had 104 schools with over 252,000 students in the program. In the second year, we'll have more than 1,400 schools representing 37% of all loans committed to enrolling. Today, I am proud to announce that in our third year, beginning July 1996, 450 new schools will join the program, which will mean 45% of all student loans will be administered through this program. Now, that's the good news. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at the students that I just mentioned, Jessica Aviles or Sandra Tinsley. They're both here. Go ask them about it. Listen to them talk about how much quicker they got the loan and what a joy it was not to have to go through the hassle and the delay and the uncertainty. But here's the good news. If we keep going until we make the student loan program available to all the schools on a voluntary basis, it will save the taxpayers $12 billion over 5 years, or about the same amount of money that would be saved if we started charging interest on student loans while the students are in college. So if we want to reduce the deficit, let's reduce the deficit by increasing education, not by reducing it. That's the message that I want you to take out there. Second thing I want to say to you is that we have a lot of Americans who are unemployed or underemployed who want more training and education. And a lot of them now only have access to certain highly specified and difficult to understand and access government programs. There are dozens of federal training programs, most of them enacted with the best of intention by Congress. What we propose to do is to put the American people who need training in control of their own destiny with these programs. Instead of just shifting the power from a federal bureaucracy even to a state one, what we propose to do is to consolidate all these training programs and create a skill grant, essentially a training voucher to people who are unemployed or underemployed who are qualified for federal help. Let them get the voucher and take it to their local community college and have access to the programs you offer for up to 2 years to get the training necessary for the future. That is a much better expenditure of that money than to continue in these programs which may or may not be easily accessible and which require a whole lot of paperwork and are very confusing. We want to consolidate the money, give it directly to the people who are entitled to it in the form of a voucher, and let them take it to you to get the education you need. I hope you will help us pass that as well in this Congress. Finally, let me talk about the tax cut issue. Everybody is for a tax cut. Who could be against it? Sounds great. But I would remind you that this is a serious issue, this deficit issue. We have worked very hard to reduce it by $600 billion. When we brought the deficit down, that's what drove interest rates down in 1993. That's what gave us our economic recovery. That's what unleashed the engine of American enterprise. And the uncertainty that hangs now around whether we continue to show discipline in our budget is causing difficulties for our economy. We cannot afford a $200 billion tax cut and continue to reduce the deficit and meet our responsibilities to education and our future. We cannot afford to tilt most of the benefits of the tax cut to upper income people. They are doing very well in the economy as it is. They are doing very well. And this is not a statement of class warfare. I want to create more millionaires. I'm proud of the fact that a lot of people have become millionaires since I have been president. But what will do that is a strong economy, a healthy economy in which everybody has the opportunity to succeed. That's what will create more successful entrepreneurs. If we have a system that grows the middle class and shrinks the underclass and keeps this economy strong, the entrepreneurs will do well. So what we should do is to have a much smaller tax cut. It should be targeted sharply to people who need it, middle class people, and in my judgment, it ought to be targeted to education. People should get a deduction for the cost of education after high school because that will raise their incomes over the long run as well as over the short run. They will more than pay it back to the Treasury in future years because we will be accelerating the number and the intensity and the pace of those getting an education in America. That's the kind of tax cut we need. Less targeted to the middle class and focused like a laser beam on education. We need an education tax cut. That's all we need for this country. Now, let me close by asking you once again to make your voice heard in another way. The community colleges of America look like America. If you go to a board meeting of the community college and hear people talk about what programs they're going to have and what projects they're going to have and what partnerships they're going to create, chances are 100 to 1 you can't tell whether there's a Republican or a Democrat talking at the board meeting. Community colleges are open to people of all races and backgrounds and religious faiths and views. They bring people together. They are America at its best. We need more of that in Washington. So if you believe that we shouldn't start charging interest on the loans, especially since there's a better way to reduce the deficit, if you believe we should increase the Pell Grants, not decrease them, if you believe we should keep expanding the direct loan program on a purely voluntary basis and see if our program is as good as I think it is and people keep using it, if you believe we should have this training voucher instead of this complicated welter of federal programs, if you believe it's important to cure the education deficit and the budget deficit, and therefore we should focus on a tightly targeted education-related tax cut, then go back home and ask the students and the faculty members and the board members to sign petitions that you can send to your local members of Congress and your senators without regard to party. We dare not let education become a political partisan issue in America. It was not in the last 2 years. It should not be in 1995 and 1996. Every American has a vested interest in seeing that we all go forward in education. Every single solitary bit of evidence shows us it is the fault line standing between us and a future in which the American dream is alive for everyone. If you want to reward hard work in America, that work must be smart work. Our future is on the line, so I implore you, when you go home, make your voices heard. Say it is not a partisan issue, it is not a political issue, it is a question of keeping the American dream alive into the 21st century. Thank you, and God bless you all.
I don't know what to say. Wasn't that something? Mr. President, Secretary Riley, Secretary Reich, this has been indeed one of the most memorable and significant events of our lives. You have honored us. You have honored us deeply with your presence, and your words have given us a lot of inspiration and energy to push forward and carry forth with the programs and initiatives that you have outlined here. You've mentioned the direct loan program. This association supported strongly the direct loan program. You mentioned your service learning in the National Service Corporation and the fact that this association had a grant as well as many community colleges with more to come. And we look forward to continuing that cooperation and to supporting that program. You mentioned the direct in-school interest subsidy for loans, and we want you to know that this association and our sister association, the Association of Community College Trustees, have been in the trenches supporting that be protected, and we appreciate your kind words on that, and we want you to know we'll be fighting that one very, very hard. You mentioned your training program, your training initiative, and though you didn't give a full outline of the details of it, I want to assure those in the audience today that it is a program that is forward-thinking, one that does contain those ingredients that we can embrace and should embrace, and we will be embracing it, and we thank you for it. And last but not least, we also want to thank you for giving us these two fine cabinet members that you have. We've certainly enjoyed We certainly agree that Secretary Riley should go bowling, and we also agree that he should continue to have a job. And again, we thank you for everything that you have done and meant for us this morning. And with that, this session is adjourned. Thank you.